So I got Clint from Liberty Lockdown talking with me today, and I came across Clint on Twitter, like, I don't know, midway through 2020 or something, when I'm paying keen attention to the few accounts out there, especially those calling themselves libertarians, which you think would be pretty easy, who are actually resisting lockdowns and just bullshit and COVID tyrannical technocracy. And Liberty Lockdown kept popping up. So I
Glad to hear it.
Start listening, and it's absolutely awesome. So Clint came out of nowhere with this Liberty Lockdown podcast, and he's crushing it. I saw you got 100,000 downloads last month or something.
50,000 downloads last month, but 100,000 downloads all time. So I am in the truly parabolic phase of growth right now.
So in 1 month you got double what you got previous to that, and it's been what, a year or so?
11 months now.
It's incredible, man. It's incredible. Congratulations.
I know.
I know a big reason is that, well, for one, the quality is awesome, and you have good interviews, you got a lot of good stuff to say yourself. But two, you're just beasting it out. I mean, you're just cranking. You're lining up guests, you're recording nonstop, which is absolutely awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm taking it like a full-time job almost. It's my passion, man. This is what I love to do. It's what I love to talk about. And the fact that I saw a window of opportunity because the LP failed so egregiously to represent the libertarians that actually believe in liberty. I was like, okay, well, here's my window. And then, once Pete Quinones had me on, and then Dave Smith had me on Part of the Problem, and it was all explosive after that.
So for those who don't know, the LP means the Libertarian Party.
Yes.
You're kind of in the mix with it. And I've observed this a little bit at a distance. I mean, I really have not really ever followed the Libertarian Party closely, but especially not in the last 10 years, 15 years, because I just haven't followed politics closely at all. But in the last couple years, I've seen a lot of people who I like. Dave Smith, the comedian, libertarian guy who's been on Joe Rogan several times, and Michael Malice, a friend of mine who's kind of running in those circles. And then I've seen some of these other sort of libertarian podcaster Twitter accounts and whatever, trying to basically take over the Libertarian Party and use it as a vehicle to actually, I don't know, spread the ideas that it's supposed to stand for.
That it's supposed to? Yeah.
So is this something that you're have you been involved in the Libertarian Party for a long time?
No, actually. I'm basically a second gen, born and raised libertarian from my dad's side, but I had never been involved in the LP. I really wasn't interested in politics officially. I was very much involved and informed, but I wasn't interested in being involved. And I still am not really interested in being involved, to be honest. But it's just that I was like, all I needed was the Libertarian Party. I don't expect them to win. I don't expect them to prevail. I just expected them to continue to carry on the torch of my beliefs. That's all I wanted. So when the lockdowns first happened, I just wanted them to be saying, this is not American. If that's how they want to frame it, if they want to go the nationalist route, fine. I don't care. I just wanted them to say, this isn't acceptable. And they didn't do it.
So that could be this, violates basic philosophical principles of libertarianism, or it's unconstitutional, or anything. It's un-American, or it's unfair, or it's there's a million things you could say. And I was only at a distance, but from my understanding, the sort of official Libertarian Party just kind of had a very milquetoast, tepid sort of be careful out there, I mean, I even saw, this wasn't the Libertarian Party, but I saw some libertarian organizations with hashtags stay home, save lives, from libertarian. I mean, I don't know. So is this kind of what the LP's approach was? Just very safe?
Yeah, no, it was very much an appeal to authority. They were very tepid, just playing it safe, kind of waiting to see how bad is the virus, as opposed to coming out on principle and saying, regardless of how severe this pandemic may end up being, we oppose the government enacting tyrannical laws to address it. That's what I wanted to hear. If it was the Black Plague, I would have had the same perspective. That's principle. That's what the Libertarian Party is supposed to have, is the principle that liberty is more important than perception of safety. And they abdicated that role. They didn't do it. So that's why I started to really chime in. I think that's why I had so many people that were also disappointed in the LP start to follow me and to push my show as well. But it was never my intent actually to get involved with the LP. It's just that this Mises Caucus thing kind of came into my circle, and I realized that everybody involved in the Mises Caucus saw this the same way I did. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, there are some actual libertarians that exist still. So this is tremendous. I'm gonna try and help these guys out.
Maybe all the people like yourself and Dave Smith and all, the Mises Caucus and all these people, maybe that is proof that I'm wrong about this, but I would have said, Libertarian Party just doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Nobody pays attention to it. They have no influence. So what's the point? What's there to save? So I'm curious what your thought is to that. Why are you trying to do something with this? It's a political party no one gives a shit about. Your podcast is more influential than they are. So who cares? You know what I mean?
It's a totally fair critique. I think that because there are people that believe that political action is necessary, and they believe that you need to have a voice within the political realm, the official political realm. I think that it's just important that if you're going to have I've said this before, if you're going to have a party that calls itself the Libertarian Party, it has to be messaging what I actually believe in. That's all I'm saying. Otherwise, I'm okay with it not existing. Honestly, I just can't have someone out there who is representing me, allegedly, who is bastardizing my philosophy and my belief system. So when I saw an opportunity for since there was no opportunity to abolish the LP, well, I was like, okay, well, then we might as well make sure that it's at least messaging for freedom and liberty. So that's really I guess the principle behind what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I sort of, so I remember way back when I used to run a lot of programs on college campuses all across the state of Michigan. And when I first started, it was 2007. And I'd be like, free economy, Students for a Free Economy is this organization I had set up, and we was running, and people were like, what's a free economy? And nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what I was talking about. And so often I would find students who found the student libertarian group. They would find us and find it really cool. And they were great to work with. And the way that most of the students found it was they get to campus, they're politically interested, and they're like, I don't like what Republicans say. I don't like what Democrats say. And this is like a big growing up moment for them because their parents inevitably are Republican or Democrat, and they reject what their parents like, and they reject the alternative. And they say, well, what else is there? And they start by looking at other political parties. Mm-hmm. And so they look at the Green Party, and they looked at, and a lot of them would find libertarianism because they would find the College Libertarian Club, which was usually affiliated with the party. And so the fact that it was there was useful. And I almost think now, I don't think that college experience is very relevant anymore because most things are online and people aren't looking through the list of college clubs to find new ideas.
Tragically, yes.
But I think the Libertarian Party, it's almost like a Wikipedia page. Like the Wikipedia page for libertarianism, if you like those ideas, it's important that it is, as correct as it can be, as clear and accurate as it can be in representing the ideas and the history behind them. And that's kind of like the LP. People are going to look there, whether you like it or not. It's not the most important thing in the world, right, but it matters because it's the first place a lot of people start.
Exactly. And if you're like me, you probably believe that there are a tremendous amount of people, particularly in America, that are libertarian, but they don't know it. So I just want there to be that platform for those that are saying, I don't agree with the conservatives on XYZ. I don't agree with the Democrats on XYZ. I'm not either of these things. What am I? And if they then have the Libertarian Party come out and go and, stay home, save a life. And they're like, I don't understand. I thought I didn't agree with, so that, and it's the same principle of if I saw Wikipedia saying that the libertarians, love John Brennan, I'd be like, I'm going to submit an entry to get that removed because it's just obviously false. So I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to correct the record.
No, and it's, I mean, you know, I'm very much political atheist and very much just from learning through my own experience, not a fan of sort of using politics as a way to make the world more free. But there's one way in which politics, not real, it's like, because politicians in our culture are both politicians and celebrities. They're two different roles at the same time. And whether we like it or not, you become a celebrity just by trying to be a politician. And so celebrities have bigger platforms than most people, right? Politicians are horrible pieces of shit. But sometimes, like when Ron Paul, so when I was going on campuses in 2007, as I mentioned, nobody knew what the hell I was talking about. 2008 comes, go back to campus in the fall. This is the first time Ron Paul ran. And it was like night and day. It was easy. People would be like, Students for a Free Economy. Is that like Ron Paul stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, like, you know, it's free markets and end the Fed and all that stuff. And like people got it because there was a celebrity voicing those things. Ron Paul, the politician, was basically ineffective. Like, I don't think he got any real bills passed or stopped anything. But Ron Paul, the celebrity, actually, a lot of people became more freedom loving and learned to live more free in their own lives. And actually, a lot of people became non-political because they started with hearing Ron Paul and saying, hey, that guy's different, right? And whatever small stage he was afforded on debates and whatever else was something that sort of normie people were tuning into, and a lot of them heard something for the first time. So I can kind of see that strategy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, there is a hero worship culture in America, like it or not. So people, particularly like libertarians and anarchists, are very opposed to hero worship, and they're like, we're into individuality and we don't need leaders and blah blah blah. I'm like, hey, I get it. I am like you, but at the same time, if you know 80% of this country that isn't like us, they need leaders, bro. Like they need to have someone who is popularizing concepts and normalizing ideas. And Ron Paul did it better than anybody. So like, yeah, I mean, I consider Ron Paul one of my heroes, even though I'm not much of a hero worship type of guy, because he broke so many people from their sleep. You know, he really did. And I think that's what I envision with Dave Smith, is that I think he can do the same thing, but to the next generation. And I hope he will. So I guess that's my hope. Ultimately, I don't believe that this system is salvageable. So like a lot of people think that I'm delusional. Like, Dave Smith's going to be president. Oh, everything's going to be fixed. Like, look, we're 30 trillion in debt. Like, I don't think this system is salvageable. So all I'm trying to do is have someone who is famous-ish get a little bit more famous, talk that liberty shit as he says it, send my message to more and more normies to try and wake enough people up that we can create some semblance of liberty from the ashes of of the collapse.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So that's why I'm interested in doing it.
It's funny. I heard you interview Vin Armani, who I'm, very, very fascinated by, and I interviewed him as well. And he was talking about I haven't seen the Twitter thread, but apparently Vin Armani and Dave Smith sort of got into some kind of Twitter fracas or something over this strategy, over Dave trying to take over Libertarian Party. And it's funny because I basically agree with everything Vin is saying, but I also am I almost feel like Vin's critiques assume that success is actually possible. Success as an electoral victory. And I don't think it is. And I think the metric for success is just different. You're just saying, can we utilize a political party to get more coverage for voices talking about liberty? It's a PR play, which I think sort of changes it a little bit.
I think that's exactly right. They're really talking past each other, and it's tragic because I love both of them, and I think that they both are headed in the same direction. And if they would just talk, it would probably be alleviated. Any of the stress would be gone. But Vin's a pretty antagonistic dude on Twitter, and he went hard in the paint with some insults very early on, and I think that made a genuine conversation almost impossible. So I hope that cooler heads can prevail, and they can converse openly, hopefully on one of their platforms to talk about this, because they are both headed towards trying to wake up and save as many people as possible. Vin may deny that. He may say, I don't have any savior complex. I think he does. I mean, I think we all do. Anybody who's talking about liberty is interested in waking people up, because otherwise you would just be living your own life. You know, we all are trying to get this message out to more people. So I think that Vin and Dave are on the same team, like it or not. And I hope that they realize it one of these days.
I want to talk a little bit more about you. So I've heard you say you came from private, the private mortgage. What do you call it? Private money mortgage?
Private money mortgage broker or lending. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to dig in a little bit to that. So I think this is an industry that like most people don't even know exists. So you are lending, I know you're retired from this now for the most part, but you were lending money, your own money or money you raised from investors to home buyers. Is that right?
Yeah, both. And it wasn't just home buyers. It could be commercial real estate, land developments, all sorts of things. But essentially, it's just a private bank. You know, I have a borrower who comes to me who can't get a loan from the bank, either because they need it really fast, which obviously underwriting with a conventional mortgage lender takes 45 days usually now, sometimes 60. I can lend in 5. So that's the niche that I'm in. And then on top of that, I am not taking Fed funds. I am not a bank. I have either my personal capital, or I take capital from quasi-retired type folks, or even working class folks that just have some savings set aside. And then I package that together. I put the loan opportunity out to my investors. They basically respond yay or nay in the vesting and the dollar amount. And then I draw docs, and that's it.
So how are you assessing the credit worthiness of the people that are coming to you for these loans? What's your process there?
It's very similar to a conventional lender. I do a full underwriting package where I'll run credit. I'll at least request some income information. I don't go as deep as verifying everything as a bank does, because ultimately my biggest concern as a hard money lender, the basis of the term hard is about, well, first it's hard money, but like as in actual money, but it's also based off of the asset. So my primary concern is that the asset itself has enough security that I don't have to worry nearly as much about your income or about your credit. So that's the main difference, is that I move faster. The interest rates are a little bit higher. The loan is short term, because you don't want someone holding on to a 9 or 10% interest rate loan for 30 years.
What kind of term we talking? Like 10 years, 5 years?
No, usually 2 or 3.
2 or 3 years. Okay. So the types of people who are coming to you are probably they've got capital, or else what they're buying is going to be generating capital for them. And it's more a question of they need more liquidity faster. It's not like average Joe middle-class person trying to buy a house. It's more like the larger things or wealthier individuals.
Yeah, it's usually guys that have a decent sized portfolio that they don't want to deal with the underwriting, or if you're self-employed, we deal with a lot of people like that can't get qualified just because they're self-employed. Maybe they're not proving their income. Maybe they're not reporting all of their income to the IRS, but they have 40% to put down on a purchase. Like who wouldn't want to lend you 60% on the purchase of real estate? I mean, it's a pretty safe loan regardless of your income or your credit history. So that's the niche that we're in. Basically, it wouldn't exist except for the fact that banks are idiots, you know, that their underwriting protocols are stupid. So that's why we exist.
No, I went through this myself. And before I had heard about your show, it was like just not long before, I was going through the process myself. And, you know, I own a business, and this is my second company, and it's a venture-backed company, and it's in the phase where it is not profitable yet, right? Which is what you do with a venture-backed company. You raise money because you believe you're going to build something that's, you know, and it could be not profitable in the startup world for like 10 plus years sometimes, right? That's normal in that world. If, you know, you could have a great business that still isn't profitable because you're not focused on profitability. Anyway, so I've got this company, and like my own credit history is great. The company's got plenty of capital, and from like top tier investors, right? My income's fine, all this stuff. I can't get a bank to touch me. It's like their criteria is just all robotic, right? It's just automatic. I own too much. And what's odd is if I owned like 10% less of my company, then I'd be fine because they wouldn't consider me an owner at that point. So like, so if I was less, if my net worth was lower, right? If I had less ownership of my company, but everything else was the same, I could easily get approved in a minute. But because I own more, it falls into this different. So I remember going through that, and I did eventually find somebody who was kind of like a more local person, but I was like, there's gotta be a private market that services people like me, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is, unfortunately, and I mean, this is a secondary part of the reason that I'm getting out of the business, other than the lockdowns, which I think have destroyed the economy and created the greatest bubble in real estate in history. But the other reason that I wanted out is because the regulatory environment is awful. Under Dodd-Frank, they laid out all of these new laws that basically criminalize much of what I was doing historically. So like they made it so that I can't lend on owner-occupied property, which is the most secure collateral you can do, is basically to have someone buy the home to live in. Those are the people that are least likely to default. They made it illegal for me to lend on that.
What?
Yeah, I'm dead serious.
Under what like made up pretext?
Consumer protection.
Who's being protected?
The borrower.
From what?
From buying the house.
Capital?
Yeah, because they basically, because of the crazy liar loans that they had, and it's always the case. So basically, the entire system was made sick because they had these things called ninja loans, which was no income, no job, no assets, or whatever it was. And basically everyone and their mother, if you had a pulse, you can get as much of a loan as you wanted in 2005 through 2007.
I remember those days, man. I remember I flipped a house back then. I was like, I flipped a house when I was like 16, and my wife and I bought a house and rented it out because we were about to sell it and the entire market collapsed and then we couldn't sell it. So we had to become landlords and rent it to a magician, and the rent checks disappeared. So
you learned the hard way.
Yeah.
So because of that, which was not happening largely from private lenders, it was happening from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac backed government lenders. But what they did as a result, because the big boys, the banks, had their lobbyists in there writing the laws, they ended up writing the laws to protect the consumers from all of these criminal, predatory loans. But it only really criminalized people like me, who were honest, upstanding, hard money lenders. They really made it much, much harder, and they monopolized the consumer lending market so that now if you are purchasing a home for consumer purpose, which is you're going to live in it, you can only go to a bank. How great is that? So people are just naive. They give the power to the government to try and fix a problem, and it always makes it worse.
Well, what's insane about all this, being steeped in Austrian business cycle theory and stuff, you and I know, like causally, what's, structurally, and though we can't predict with certitude dates and times and quantities and where things will manifest, but we know things are screwed up, right? We know malinvestments everywhere, and we know what that means. And the problem is people will look and say, well, it's the animal spirits. It's the greed of speculators and investors. And when everything collapses, people will blame. They'll be like, look for evidence at people buying Dogecoin, which was literally made to be a joke, and it purposefully sucks as a technology, and they're buying it and it's going insane. This is because people are stupid and greedy. And the reality is the opposite. Like what you just described to me, if you want to be in the game of helping people buy houses, policy, not just monetary policy, artificially low interest rates, but that's a huge part of it. Even like fiscal and regulatory policy makes it so that the option of being a responsible investor is not on the table. It's either illegal or you'll go out of business because your competitors are chasing much higher gains fueled by a bunch of artificial crap. And so everyone is incentivized to behave like an absolute insane speculator. And so they do. And then people blame the market. It's like people aren't naturally that risky with their money. They're only that risky if you're forcing them to be through all these policies and money printing.
Exactly. And that's why, to me, the number one platform for the LP ought to be, other than ending the wars, I think even possibly above that, ought to be ending the Federal Reserve, because it is so detrimental to a functioning capitalist system. And if that's what we believe in, which I certainly do, you cannot have a central bank, because all it does is it creates a litany of evidence that capitalism is failing to people that don't understand what's happening. And that's why I try to go out of my way to really explain why it's so detrimental, why it creates all this malinvestment, why we are in this consistent, constant boom bust cycle. If people don't understand that, then yeah, of course, if you're just an idiot sitting on your couch and you're like, oh, here goes the stock market again, crashing again, all these greedy dudes on Wall Street. Oh, here goes real estate. I can't, now I'm going to have to sell my second home because blah, 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 blah. People don't understand it. And it's just tragic, because it's so simple and obvious once you get it, but most people don't. So they just think that it's greed and bad decision making that ends up in these situations. And it just couldn't be further from the truth.
Or you can criticize some of these things happening in the economy and criticize government, and people will come back and they'll be like, hey, it's all these big banks. And even the Fed itself is technically not part of the government. It's private banking interests that are the problem. So we need government to rein them in. Even if you accept that premise, they don't think through, what does that mean? We need government to rein them in. It means those very banks are going to pass laws, just like they did to you, that ban their competition and give them more. Like, if you use the tool of violence, right? Like, having this tool that can be wielded, a monopoly on the use of force, makes people who are behaving badly behave worse, right? Mm-hmm. It empowers it. If you don't like those banks, what you should want is for them to have to compete way more than they currently do, not for them to get regulated, right? Because if they're the powerful ones, they'll write the regulations.
Exactly. And what I always try and point out too is that there is no more important signal for the market than the price of money. And you currently have the Federal Reserve setting the rate at which money is borrowed basically across the globe. I mean, that's unbelievable power. So if you are opposed to monopolies, this should be the number one issue you have, is that you cannot have someone with a monopoly on setting the price of money, because if you do, this is what you get.
Man, that's such a great point. That's such a great point to go in with the monopoly angle. Like, who has more power? The one entity that gets to decide the price of money for the entire world, or one company that's competing with a bunch of others to sell you some service or some good. So, right. So before we move on to, I do want to get into sort of your thoughts on the economy at large and sort of what's happening and where you might see things going. But I want to finish on sort of the business model of this private money mortgaging, because I think it's so cool. And I'm fascinated by all businesses and all entrepreneurs. And I think they're all so much more interesting than people realize. So I got the part about who's coming, who wants these mortgages and why, and how you're sort of assessing their risk. When it comes to if you are doing the loans with outside investors, what is your process of, so are you going and raising money perpetually, or are you going every time you get a loan application, you go out and say, hey, who wants to get in on this and on what terms, and kind of doing it that way?
Yeah, basically I get a lead from a broker who says, hey, I've got this borrower. Here's the general idea of what he's looking for. He sends it to me. I ask for XYZ additional information. I put together the package. I then issue a loan proposal and I say, I can do this loan because I know my investors. I know what they'll lend at, or I know myself. And if my investors won't do it, I'll do the loan personally. So I send out a loan proposal. They either accept or decline. If they accept, they send back a signed loan proposal. I then put this in a package. I email it out to all of my investors, which is only like 100 people. And I just say, first come, first serve. Here's the terms. Here's the details. Here's some photos. Here's a broker price opinion or appraisal. And this is when I'm going to need your funds. Respond back with your vesting and your investment amount. And I'm telling you, in 30 minutes, I could fund $1 million deal, like just from email. So
that's awesome.
It was not an issue. And it's because I don't do a ton of volume because I'm a one-man show. So like, and I wasn't trying to get big, because the bigger you get as a hard money lender, you're toast. Like, the regulators will crush you. So yep. I would only do a couple loans a week maybe. But because the fees are higher, I was still making a great living. So I was very happy with that. But obviously with the the lockdowns and the inflated real estate market, I was like, okay, it's time to withdraw.
Well, okay, so I want to talk about withdrawing from it, but what percentage of the time, and I don't know how many years you did this, but what percentage of the time did you have to repossess the property? Like, was that frequent? Are these like really high risk or not really?
No, okay. I mean, I was fortunate because I started my company in 2013. So I had already missed the big implosion. So I kind of started fresh. But when I was working for my dad's company, he had 100 foreclosures that I had to liquidate. So
Ooh.
yeah, that was my job, was to liquidate all these foreclosures. And it was a
And
nightmare.
he survived through the 2008 collapse.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, his investors obviously had some bloody noses. Like there was certain loans that you'd only get maybe 80% of your capital back and things like that. Some really bad ones, but very, very few and far between. I'd say even for him, probably 80+% of his portfolio got through unscathed.
I mean, the fact that the loans are so short term just has to be like a saving grace in a situation like that, right?
That helps. But also because you're making 9 or 10% interest, if the loan performs for say 3 years and you end up then taking a 30% loss, you end up getting all of your money back, but you made nothing. So it's like, that still sucks, but it's better than the stock market. Whereas if you lose 50% or 70% of market value and you sell at the bottom because you need liquidity, that's a much worse situation. So for his company, I'll just speak for mine. I started in 2013, so I didn't have any economic recession until the lockdowns that was even a potential to, implode my portfolio. But I'd say I had 2 foreclosures out of a couple hundred loans over my career. Yeah. So I had way less than 1%. Yeah. But I was very conservative because my job was to liquidate all the bad investments that he had done in the last bull market. So when I started my own company, I was like, oh, this reminds me of that. Like, not doing that. So
it's almost like you operated as a rational business,
What a concept. Yeah. And which is why I need to be put in prison, which is why I should be made illegal, because
we can't have this guy out here giving these kind of loans that actually make sense. So tell me about making the call to get out of this business. Because from where I'm sitting, it's like, what's the matter with this guy? He's running this thing. He can dial it up and dial it down however much he wants. Do one every week, do one every month if he wants to make good money. What made you say, I want to be done? Like that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, in fairness, I am not opposed to restarting my company in a state that doesn't treat me like a criminal.
So you're in California.
Yeah, exactly. So like if I move to Texas or some other state that has kinder entrepreneurial laws, I'll consider reopening and doing, probably not having outside investor capital, but just investing my family's capital. So I could see myself doing that. But as far as why I shut it down is simply because there was too much. My job was as a fiduciary to look after my investors' capital above my own personal interests. And I took that very seriously. So when I start to evaluate investments in an environment where you have tons of uncertainty, you have all of these people that are unemployed, you have unknowable amounts of foreclosures that are pending because you have all of these people who have moratoriums on both foreclosures and evictions. There's just too much to calculate. I can't know when the bottom falls out. So obviously I still have a portfolio of loans that are performing in this environment. I hope that they get liquidated before the bottom falls out. But all I can do is stop lending more money into a sick economic model. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Man, that's a hard thing to do, because when the market's in this euphoric phase where everybody's just drunk. I mean, everything, the price of everything, stock market, crypto, real estate, doesn't matter. Collectibles, trading, like just everything, lumber, right? It's out of control. Yeah. And it's so hard, even if you know that this can't last, to stop, because then you think about the opportunity cost. Well, if I was still playing in that market, I stop, maybe I'll be out in time, I won't be the last man standing. But it's like, if it's your own money, that's one thing. But as you said, if you're dealing with investors' money and stuff, man, that's a game that I'm with you. Like, I don't want to play that. I don't want my fate to be in the hands of something that I know to be untrustworthy. Right.
Exactly. And it's not just that they're investors. I know these people. I care about these people. These are not nameless, faceless Fed fund windows. These are people that, worked hard and saved and invested. And, many of them live off of this income for their retirement. So I really deeply care about these people. So the last thing I want to do is jeopardize a lifetime of work with some intermittent or temporary greed, something that benefits me. It just doesn't make any sense. And you got to keep in mind too, these people, because they rely on this interest income, they are beating down my door every day asking to lend that money. So it takes double resolve to tell them no. I can't in good conscience redeploy your capital into this economy. I think it's too dangerous. Some of them take it to heart. Some of them go to other brokers. Some of them continue to push this money into a sick system. And all I can do is say, hey, at least I could sleep at night, man. Like, at least I did the right thing. And if they go out and they end up blowing their money, at least it wasn't me.
Where do you put money these days, though? Like, what do you tell these people, right? If you have any kind of money that you're sitting on, even if it's just a 10, 20, 50,000, couple 100,000, $1 million, right? Depending on your age, like, if you have savings, if you have, like, where do you put it? I don't trust the stock market. I don't trust, like, how are you thinking about this these days? And like, if you keep it in US dollars, it's like, well, that's purchasing power of that's getting eaten away. What are your thoughts?
So I have a very unpopular libertarian opinion, but I think that, or an unpopular opinion for libertarians is what I mean to say, is that I think that it's important to have exposure to cash because I think that you're going to see a deflationary collapse. In a deflationary collapse, even with a depreciating dollar, because the deflation is so much more rapid than the dollar's debasement, it should be an opportunity of a lifetime to buy depreciated assets after the collapse. So I like, obviously in this environment, because I can't know if we are going deflationary soon or if we're going to have, as the Bank of America reported yesterday, intermittent hyperinflationary period, which is a horrifying term. So I don't know if it's going to be hyperinflation. I don't know if we're Zimbabwe. I don't know if we're Weimar. I don't know if we're Venezuela. I don't know if we're just absolutely annihilating the dollar, or as Janet Yellen and Joe Biden came out this morning and said, we are open to raising interest rates to alleviate some of the, I don't know, tailwinds or whatever they say about the economy. And I just want people to be aware that as someone who really deeply understands how much the interest rates are making all of this go right now, if they do that, if they raise interest rates, you will see a deflationary collapse. Like, I have no doubt in my mind there is too much debt in this system. It is all predicated on hyper low, record low borrowing rates that we've never seen before. If that changes, if all of a sudden a mortgage for a house, which you could get as of 6 months ago for 2.75% on 30 years, which is nuts. If it goes to 5.5%, the starter homes in San Diego that you're buying for $800,000 are once again worth $500,000 overnight. That's how it works. So I would much rather buy in that environment after the collapse and then allow the Fed to pump my assets again, which is what they do. So if it's either we're going to get one more, this is my thesis, is that we're either going to have one more collapse before the ultimate end of fiat currency, or this is the end of fiat currency. You have to hedge both ways. So you have to have cash to buy a deflationary collapse, but you also have to have hard assets, either real estate, maybe cryptocurrency I'm a fan of. So I think having exposure to that makes sense. Precious metals, which is very, very low. And I don't understand that given how
I wanted to ask
crypto
you about
is.
that. Yeah, that's pretty weird. But
yeah.
I'm glad though that, because I don't, I've never gone heavy into investment and financial stuff. I understand economics in the very theoretical sense, and then I'm very much focused on entrepreneurship. And so I've put all of my resources primarily into building my business, but I've become more and more attuned, especially the older I've got, into this stuff. And it's just funny, my gut instinct, and I feel like I'm crazy. Everybody else I talk to that sort of shares my worldview is I want to have some cash because liquidity with so much uncertainty, I want to be able to act fast. And so if you've got stuff in, precious metals, that's kind of a cumbersome process of turning those into a different asset, right? So like you said, if the bottom falls out of the real estate market and I see an opportunity or whatever it might be, being able to deploy resources quickly matters. And even like crypto, especially if you're talking Bitcoin, like if all of a sudden everybody starts trying to move it, I mean, you can be screwed. I've had this happen before after the 2017 thing, like you can have unconfirmed transactions that last days and you don't know how long it is. And so I want instant access. And the other thing is with all this capital gains tax stuff, got a bunch of money on Robinhood or whatever, and all of a sudden you see an opportunity to buy a house because the market collapses and you're going to get taxed, So like, I felt this sense that like, as much as I hate cash, I feel like I want to have cash ready. And it's just interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah. I mean, real life-changing money is made with counter-cyclical investing. So if you can go against the trend and get out of a market early and be sitting on cash when there's blood in the streets and everyone's flipping out and they'll sell whatever they can. Like imagine had you sold everything you owned in 2007 and then you waited till 2009, you'd be Warren Buffett today, Yeah. Like that's how it works. So I am trying to go against the trend. When I talk to people and I see everyone in unison is so confident that this is the end of fiat, that the dollar is dying, that you're crazy not to be fully invested in the stock market or real estate or precious metals or crypto. I'm sorry. I whenever I see everyone saying the same thing, I go, they're wrong.
Yep.
So that's how I'm looking at it.
I'm so with you. I'm like, this just doesn't feel, if everyone calls it a sure thing. I've seen this movie before. So tell me your thoughts on what is going on with gold and silver. They're like the only
asset that's not up.
Yeah, right. Like poor Peter Schiff,
I think my belief is that the belief in maintaining value through hard assets has been completely taken over by crypto. I really think that. I think that anybody who was a gold bug, who's actually looking at, and I don't blame them, because if you look at the performance of gold and silver, and then you look at the performance of Bitcoin over the past 12 months, you go, well, I'd have to be fucking crazy not to have bought Bitcoin. Like gold's up 20% or something. Bitcoin's up 400%, 500%, whatever it is. So I think that's really all there is to it, is that people are if you're trying to preserve the purchasing value of your savings right now, everyone thinks that the play is a cryptocurrency bet. So
man, it makes me so bullish on gold and silver, because I'm like,
me too.
Because like I completely believe that the upside for a lot of these cryptos, Bitcoin especially, it would not be at all shocked if it continues to skyrocket and goes crazy. But I also believe that even if I believe there's a 60% chance of Bitcoin going to 500,000 a coin or whatever, I also believe there's like a 30% chance that it crashes to the basement, right? Whereas like
me too,
gold, the upside's a lot smaller, but so is the downside. Like just look at that shit historically. And so I'm kind of like, everybody's poo-pooing this thing. It feels like,
feels like a buy.
I've never really been interested in precious metals before. Again, I've always just gone all in on my businesses, but I'm kind of like, this is interesting. I kind of like this.
I think it's worth having exposure to. And as I said, I can't, because there's so many variables. No one knows. Anyone tells you that they know definitively, they're lying. They just don't know. So my advice to people, even though none of this is financial advice, this is all what I am doing personally, is to have exposure to a bunch of different things, and I think that if you don't have some precious metals, it's probably a mistake, particularly if you're really concerned about Weimar Germany. Like if you actually think dollar is dead, why the hell wouldn't you want to have some precious metals in your safe? Like you should have some exposure, even if you're a huge Bitcoin believer, because ultimately, if there is a deflationary collapse where there is a desperate need for liquidity, everything. We saw this in March of 2020. I don't know why I have to remind people, because Bitcoin, the fundamentals of Bitcoin didn't change over the past year. You know, the price of Bitcoin went to $6,000 or $5,000 in March of 2020, just on the announcement of the lockdowns. That was because, not because Bitcoin was, trash all of a sudden. It was because people were seeking liquidity because the stock market took a shit, because we were locking down the economy and everyone was responding rationally, and that they were like, oh my God, the world's ending. I'm going to sell all of my assets. No one had liquidity. So that's what happens. And if you think that the same thing won't happen again if we have a deflationary collapse, you're crazy. Like, I really believe that you will see much lower entry points in basically every cryptocurrency across the board. And I would like to have some liquidity to be a buyer in that environment.
Yes. Yep. I'm with you. Talk to me a little bit more about this. You mentioned with the real estate market in particular, that there have been some of these laws passed since the lockdowns that prevent evictions, basically, or foreclosures rather.
Both.
Where are we with that? Like, is there like a wave of foreclosures on the way that's being forestalled by policy? And how long can the bank survive that? What do you see happening there?
Yeah, I think I've read different things. It's really weird. I can't get a real clear read on this, but I've read that there's either 10 million or 4 million houses that are in forbearance. So basically the borrower is not paying, but the bank is not foreclosing. And they did that because the government made it illegal to foreclose or evict in this period. And that moratorium has been extended through June of 2021, and it'll have an automatic extension for 6 months. So if you go to your bank in June of 2021 and you say, hey, I can't afford my mortgage because of COVID or whatever, and say, I'm not going to be able to make a payment, they will give you an automatic 6-month extension from there. So basically anybody that wants it doesn't have to pay their mortgage until 2022. So the way I see that is you're going to have a lot of people essentially not paying their mortgage.
Why am I paying my mortgage?
Right. Well, and a lot of people already did that. I did that. I did it on my primary residence, because I was like, well, if I don't have to, I'm not gonna. So I ended up selling my house. So I ended up having to, make those back payments. But what I envision is a bunch of people not paying their mortgages. You get to the end of this year and everyone's going to say to themselves, wow, the market's up a lot. I'm going to sell, because I still say COVID, screwed up my job. I lost my job. There's tons of people that have still lost their jobs. There's tons of people that took pay cuts, that they say to themselves, I don't really want to afford this house anymore. And I have $300,000 in equity and I only bought it 3 years ago. I'm going to sell this place. And I think you're going to have a ton of people making that same decision all at the same time, which will add all of this inventory to a market that has far too little. We only have 1 million houses for sale across the country. That is nuts. That is absolutely insane. No one is selling right now. And can you blame them? They don't have to pay their mortgage. Why would they sell their house? So they're just sitting in it. And you have, untold inventory that is kind of held back by foreclosures and eviction moratoriums. Then you have all of this other inventory that's held back by people that are just uncertain about what the hell's going on. Yeah. So they're like, I don't know what to do. But you need to have probably 4 or 5 million more houses hit the market in order to balance inventory. The reason that the prices are going up 15, 20% annually is because there's so little inventory that you have these feeding frenzies where you get 10 or 15 offers in the first day that a house hits the market. And this is just
like I just went through this personally. It's insane. I mean, we made full price offers on like a dozen places. Every time we would make an offer within hours of the listing going up. Like not on Zillow, like pre-Zillow, right? Full price offers beat out every time by cash buyers paying above list price. I mean, like insanity. So what's going on with construction of homes? I mean, I just saw this thing about the price of lumber is going crazy. I'm sure that plays a part. Are there less builders because they don't feel like they can bank on that's a little bit more of a long-term play, or what's going on with new home construction?
Well, I can only speak to California because that's the only place I've ever developed anything, but I would imagine it's a similar story across the country. The regulatory environment for builders sucks. It costs so much money. It takes so much time. The city approval process is outrageous. There's so much cost that's added to it Then you had the supply chain breakdown that happened from the lockdowns, which made all of the materials skyrocket. I mean, you're talking major increases, like probably 40 or 50% to the bottom line of a total construction of a home. And I'm building 6 right now, so I know this firsthand.
Cool.
So yeah, so all of this adds up to it's very capital intensive and time intensive. And when the lockdowns first happened, people like me who were actively developing real estate were like, holy shit, I've made a huge mistake. Like, I am not going to be able to sell these things before everything implodes. Little did I know that they were going to pump the system full of $7 trillion in fiat, increase the, M2 by 24% annually. I didn't know. I didn't know that was going to happen. So I was bailed out by that decision because I now have these 6 houses that are about to hit the market in 90 days, and they'll all be sold within 24 hours of me putting them on the market, probably at record prices, I would imagine. So I think that you are undoubtedly, there are a lot of very aggressive builders that are probably going as fast as they can to build as much more inventory as they can. So I think you'll see a lot of inventory hit, but people don't understand how slow this process is. Like, to buy a huge parcel and to subdivide it to build out like 100 tract homes, and then to get all of the materials and the builders and the contractors lined up and to get it all done, you're talking a year and a half at a bare minimum for most of these projects. So I think that's the real issue, is that, no one suspected that there would be so much demand, and it's just going to take a while for that inventory to ramp up.
So you said that, there's hardly any house on the market. People are not paying their mortgage, and then they're going to get to this point where they have to start paying, and they're going to start to sell. So do you see that tanking the market, the prices of housing, or you think there's still just too little inventory for that to be okay?
I think there's too little inventory. So my real doomsday scenario is not that. And people have misunderstood me because I went on Pete Quinones' show and I talked about it, and I should have been more explicit. I don't, because there's so little inventory, I think that inventory will actually just balance the market and cool it off. But the real issue is that you're seeing hyperinflationary forces, and the Federal Reserve is going to have to increase interest rates. That is where the real bottom falls out. So that's my real doomsday scenario, is that they increase interest rates, and all of this inventory from all these developers hits, and all of this inventory from all the people that have foreclosure and eviction moratoriums hits. All of this happens in a perfect storm in like 24 months, and then it's like,
how do you personally? So this is something that I've struggled with myself, and I've talked with a lot of other friends, especially those with families like myself, how to balance attempting to maximize, wealth, freedom, survivability, whatever, through what I believe is coming, while at the same time attempting to not give up my, lower my current quality of life too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get your take as a guy who doesn't have, you don't have a family, correct? You don't have a children or anything, because I'm really curious how the calculus works. So like for me, we saw how insane the market was getting, and a house that we'd only been in for 3 years, and we were like, oh my, this is insane what we can get for this thing.
Right.
Maybe we should try. We weren't planning on moving for several years, but we had kind of eventually wanted to move out and have some land and do kind of a farmstead thing. But this was like down the road. Everything happens with COVID, and the idea of being away and kind of having a little bit more land and independence and things like that was more appealing than ever. And then the market for houses, we were like, this is crazy. We can get so much money for this house. It doesn't make any sense. I think maybe we should do this. But I really wanted to sell that house and then rent until the housing market collapsed. Because I'm like, yeah, but when we go to buy, we're going to face the same irrational market. And we did. But we've been renters before for many years and rented homes. And I've always liked it. I like not having the maintenance and whatever. But the downside is every couple of years when your lease is up, your landlord could do anything they want to, right? And if you got a family and they're all in love with the house and the neighborhood or whatever now, that's a lot to put on kids that need to, everybody move. We got to find a new house quick, which has happened to us before. And so I'm like, I want to rent, but I don't know how long this could take. Like maybe hyperinflation happens and the real estate market prices never collapse, or maybe the collapse takes 5 years and we got to rent and the rental market keeps skyrocketing and we get priced out of houses and we got to, and like, if I was single, I totally would have sat on that cash and I would have waited. I got a family and I want to get them settled in a place that's, and so like, it's really hard. And even just where we live, we looked long and hard about living internationally. You know, I hear all Vin's stuff about Saipan. We looked at some other countries. We looked at every state in the union. We looked at, and like, if it was just me and my wife, we'd be in Saipan or the Caribbean or something right now, right? We'd be somewhere a little crazier. Right. But it's not. We've got kids and we've got extended family, right? And so like, we got to balance a lot of these things, or we'd be out in like, you know, whatever, Alaska or somewhere super, super isolated. But so like, I'm curious from your perspective, now that you're in the position where I know you are trying to get out of California and you know what you know about what's coming economically. So in terms of where you're living, where you're putting your resources, how are you making these decisions? How do you make this calculus? Like, you know, are you like, screw it all, man, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to go live in some cabin and have maximum freedom and wait till it collapses and then reemerge and buy up the world? Or are you like, no, I still want to, like, you know, be a part of society? Like, you know what I mean?
It's a very tough balance. It really is. I think the reason I've got to be so financially free is because I've been single. I mean, I've had, you know, serious girlfriends for extended periods of time, but I've never been married and had kids or anything. I've been able to make these really, I don't know, just borderline like self-flagellating decisions where like every house I've ever owned, I have subdivided it and rented out half of it, you know, like something that a family man probably wouldn't do. I made $40,000 a year off of my Airbnb from the downstairs of my primary residence where I sit today, and it paid my mortgage. So for the past 6-7 years now that I've lived here for free. So like, these are all decisions that, you know, would my quality of life been better not to have walked around on eggshells when I have guests below and not to, you know, blare music? Of course, I would have had a lot more fun, but sometimes you just make these decisions to better yourself in the long haul. And I think that that's the same thing I'm doing with, you know, selling everything now and moving out of California. To answer your question more directly, I think that I'll probably end up buying a primary residence in whatever state I decide is going to be my long-term haul, even if I have to pay into the stupid bubble.
Yep.
Because I think that whatever state I buy into is going to be a net immigration inflow state. So I don't think that they'll be as damaged as, say, California. I think California is going to be demolished when this actual implosion comes, because they are losing tons of population, but more importantly, they're losing the people that produce jobs. So I think that states like that are in trouble. I think states like Florida and Texas, which are having this incredible infusion of really intelligent young people that are going to be bringing businesses and capital, it's like, I'm not nearly as worried about those markets collapsing. So I think that it goes back to the concept of all real estate is local. And in this situation, even if you see an increase in interest rates, I think you will still probably see a price decrease in those states, but it won't be so catastrophic that it doesn't make sense for me to buy in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. When we were looking, we're talking, I talked to realtors in several different cities. So in Charleston, South Carolina, where we were living, in Chattanooga and Nashville, Tennessee, and even places you wouldn't think, Columbia, South Carolina, which is not like a great place to live that people are excited about or whatever. And these guys were like, they're like, I have no inventory. I can't keep, they said in this part of the country, at least in Tennessee, a little bit of California as well. But they said, there's all these guys from New York and they're literally just buying anything that has acreage or land. They're buying it sight unseen and just, they're not even moving here. They're just like, this is my doomsday escape. I need to put cash somewhere and have a piece of property that I can get the hell out of the city. Exactly so it's right. Crazy. Like farms are getting bought up, just like crazy stuff. And I think there are some places where if the real doomsday scenario happens, there's certain types of real estate that may be even more in demand, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm open to, you know, buying a condo and, you know, buying something way less than what I need just to kind of ride out and get to, you know, like actually see what transpires and then make better decisions from there. Like I could get a condo in Miami for 300, 400 grand. So it's like, that's nothing to me. So I can do that and then just wait for the shit hit the fan, and then I could go, okay, now I'm going to buy my dream home, you know?
Yep.
So if you have that kind of flexibility, I think it makes sense. And even if you have a family, like, I think it's prudent for the sake of your family to really consider, like, if I own a house that has $500,000 in equity in a blue state, should I be getting out of here? You know, like it's worth consideration.
What are your thoughts on, because this is something I never really thought much about. I always thought that Thomas Jefferson, as much as he's got a lot of great ideas, was like totally wrong, miscalculated about, oh, well, if the US is to survive, it needs a largely agricultural farming type of, you know, society. There's something about his ideas there that are now starting to seem maybe a little bit like farsighted or something. Because I've noticed the best correlation I can come up with between absolute technocracy, people willing to put up with technocracy, the biggest correlation is population density. It's like the lower the population density, almost no matter where you are in the country or even in the world, the lower the population density, the lower the tolerance for this stuff. And it's made me like, and I'm like a big cosmopolitan. I love global free trade. I love culture. I love, you know, cities and stuff. I mean, I didn't grow up in a big city, but like, I don't want to raise my kids in a really big city, but I love them. I love visiting. I like all that stuff. I'm like, shit, man. Like, I'm rereading James Scott's, you know, Seeing Like a State and all this stuff, like, head to the hills. Cause if you want to maintain your freedom, there's a part of me that's just, I'm wary of any large population center right now when I've seen some of the crazy shit going down. So I'm curious from your standpoint. And again, I'd be much riskier as a single person in either direction. I might go live out in the middle of freaking Alaska, in the middle of nowhere, or I might be much more comfortable going to a big city and like, oh, if I need to get out, I can get out. But having kids, it's a little different. But like, how are you thinking about that? Do you have an impulse to like flee large population centers or no?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think if you witnessed 2020 and you didn't come away going like, ooh, I don't know about cities, man, this looks a little sketch. I think I don't know what you were looking at. Yeah, I am 100%. I mean, if I had kids, I would almost certainly be buying like, if I had a wife and a family, I would almost certainly be buying like a farm type property and you know, buying an armory's worth of arms and like teaching the kids how to hunt and farm and all that. Like, I really think that this is a potential within not just our lives, but in the short term, that we see a real societal collapse, particularly when it comes to high population density centers.
Isn't it weird to say that? Like, it's so weird to say that. I've always been an optimist and I still consider myself one. It feels weird to even have to think about that, but I feel like I have to be responsible.
I completely agree with you, man. Believe me, like, people will hear me talk about this and they'll probably think that I'm some like super pessimistic doomsday guy who never thought that anything good would ever happen in America. Completely contrary to who I am as a person. I thought that technological innovation and the unbelievable spirit of America and the entrepreneurs that exist here, like, we could overcome anything. I'm sorry. There are people that are working 24/7 to try and do this great reset thing, and they're not hiding it. They're very overt about it. This is not some conspiracy theory. They believe in it. So I'm taking them seriously. And if you saw what happened in 2020, that was a product of their brainchild. You know, this is what they believe in, is that you can sacrifice freedom and liberty for their power. I mean, that's what they believe. So I think that they're going to continue down this path, and it's going to come to a head where, you know, the people that still believe in liberty and freedom go right up against these people that don't, and we're going to see who wins. I personally, as a peaceful person who is not a military vet or anything like that, I'm not really interested in being on the front line. So yeah, rural living sounds awesome to me.
It's funny how, you know, on the one hand, being, you know, because I got married so young and have kids and stuff, and it's easy to be like, man, there's so many ways in which having a family to think about, whatever, it restricts a lot of stuff. But there's other ways that that I have a lot of, you know, like things that are nice and easy for me that I don't often think about with single people. So for example, the fact that I already have a family, it's very easy for me to make the decision of like, okay, now I got to prioritize making sure my family's safe and whatever. Whereas for you, like, I always wonder this with single people in recent years, and especially since 2020. I'm guessing you want a family someday. I hope that's not too personal to ask.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, you can't retreat away from civilization too much if you're still trying to start a family.
Yeah. Unless I'm going to adopt.
Where do you go to find like good people that you might want to date and marry and whatever? Like, I feel like that's harder than ever. And just like, nobody's getting together, more and more crazy people around, you know, like just this, that's a big challenge. It's like needing in the midst of a hyperinflationary, crazy speculative, statist, falling apart world, you're out there on the market for a spouse. How does that work out?
It doesn't work. I completely agree with you. I think that's why I've been using my platform and my Twitter to like meet so many unbelievable women that see the world similarly.
So this is all just an advertisement for you to get dates.
Yeah, Liberty Lockdown is just a dating show. No, seriously, because like my worldview is so unusual. You know, very few people see what I see. They don't understand what I'm talking about. I need someone that gets it to some extent, because I have to make decisions for our family that I need my partner to be on board with. And if they're like, we're gonna live in downtown New York City, I'd be like, you're fucking no, we're not. Like, that's absolutely not going to happen. So I need someone who sees the world similarly. And I think that's the cool thing. And I never considered Twitter a dating platform, but I've discovered that that's a really good way to like match up with someone ideologically first, so that you could be like, okay, well, at least we have that. Now we can see if there's attraction and chemistry and everything else. But yeah, Tinder and stuff, like, I'm not dealing with this duopoly mindset where, you know, if you voted for Trump, swipe left. If you voted for Biden, swipe left. It's like, look, I don't even want to fucking deal with either of you people. Like,
if you voted, get out of here.
Yeah, right.
It is so crazy. I remember I've worked with a lot of younger people who are single over the years, and even before all the 2020 stuff, I would always ask them, because I'm like so old, and I mean I've been married for 18 years, so I'm like and before that I grew up like homeschool conservative. I only dated one person before my wife, and so like I don't know any of this stuff.
Are you 36? Anyway. How old are you?
I'm 30. I'll be 38 this year.
Damn, all right, you're my age. You look better than me. That pisses me off, man. Good job.
But it's like I would always ask them like, well, how do you? Especially because nobody goes to church anymore. People don't go to like, I don't know, like social club. Like, where do you go to physically meet people? Because especially people who like would work for me, are all very passionate about their beliefs and things. The odds that your neighbor is just going to happen to be interested in, anarcho-capitalism or whatever, or the people that you work with, they're so low. And it's like, what do you just like go to bars and hope for the best? Do you get out? And I've always been curious, because we're in this weird time where like technology has enabled so much more for communication, but there's still some part of me that's like, but it's not the same as being in person. You know what I mean? And then there's that, like with this lockdown stuff too, it's like, I love technology, but I'm also like, as soon as you start telling me I'm only, this Zoom call is awesome. You and I live, 1,000 miles apart. We can do this. As soon as I start being told this is the only way you're allowed to do it, I start to get pissed off, and I'm like, no, right? Something's wrong here. So like, just trying to find real human interaction is just a challenge, I think.
Yeah, and it's super important. I mean, that's why I was so opposed to the lockdowns, is because it ripped that from people, and I knew that would create fissures in society that we would be paying for fucking decades. So that's why I was so opposed to it. Other than the fact that I value my own personal freedom and liberty, I also don't want to live in a dystopic hellscape where everyone's at each other's throats because no one's had a hug in a fucking year. It's insane. So yeah, for me personally, beach volleyball has been my outlet, man. Like that's how I've maintained my sanity. That's how I've met a lot of the girls I've dated over the years, is through beach volleyball. Ultimately, like, it doesn't usually align up ideologically, but as I've said, most people, I think, at their core are libertarians. So yeah, I've never struggled to get along with the significant other, as long as they're not some like hardcore leftist or hardcore, Trumplican type person. Like, I can get along with it, pretty much anybody else in between. So it's not impossible to find, but if I'm trying to like move us to the woods, I'm going to need some really based chick that's like, okay, I'll do whatever you say.
Look, that's one upside of you know, the iron fist is usually under the velvet glove. And since 2020, the velvet glove has kind of come off and it's just like raw naked tyranny. And so a lot of sort of normie people who might have thought some of our beliefs are kind of weird are like, no, you're right. You know what I mean? Exactly. Like a lot of people are open to it now. Like, okay, maybe I should have been listening.
Hell yeah. Like it's so hilarious because I have friends from volleyball. I have friends from my life, obviously, that listen to my show, and they used to think I was a crazy person. And now they're like, this dude's a truth teller, you know, like I'm like borderline prophetic because I was always telling people like, we are headed towards tyranny. Like they're talking about taking our guns. They could do basically anything to us. Like you have no idea how bad this can get and how rapidly it can happen. Now, granted, I didn't think it would happen like this. I didn't think that we would have a lockdown over a pandemic that I think is borderline benign. But here we are. So now everyone gets to listen to me and they're like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to what this guy says from now on because he was right. Like the government is not our savior. Like it is a very dangerous entity in our lives. And I think that that's probably the greatest thing that came from 2020 is that so many people had that revelatory experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're bringing this home. I know you've been generous with your time. We went over, but I don't feel too bad about it because you also showed up late.
Dude,
so
I owe you, please.
I texted Clint. I'm like, I'm here. I feel like the chick getting stood up on a date. Come on. So besides your podcasting empire that you are building and kind of deploying your capital, looking for opportunity, looking for where you're going to live, what other, are you pursuing any other adventures? Are you pursuing your rap career? Anything else?
No, not pursuing the rap career. I don't think I'm good enough for that, to be perfectly honest, but I do appreciate that so many people enjoy my intro music. I think that, for me, probably the biggest other exploit or endeavor that I'm taking on is just continuing to try and improve myself as a person. Like I really spend a lot of time. I work out every day. I try to meditate as often as possible. I do yoga a lot. I think that it's really important given how just the turmoil of the past 12 months, particularly for someone like me who lives alone, works alone. It was just tough, man. It was really hard. So like it made me circle back and be like, okay, what are the things that, help with my mental health? And I had to answer those questions. It's like a social life. And I just have to like force myself to continue to pursue these things that make me a more well-rounded person, because otherwise I can go to a really dark place, particularly with all of my worst fears coming true in a 12-month period. So I'd say, the podcast is probably my number one endeavor or like emotional giving that I have to do. But then I spend a ton of time just trying to better myself. And then also I'd like to find a significant other that I can, create a life with, because I'm at that stage of life. Like I had always said, I don't want to have kids until I can do so with, making them the top priority. And like, I don't have to worry about money, and I'm at that position. So like that was my excuse all these years. I had a lot of good girls that I dated over the years that I was like, I don't want to have a family yet. I'm sorry. Like I'm still got these career achievements that I'm interested in. And now I hope that I haven't missed or foregone all of those opportunities, and I can't find anybody. I think it'll work out eventually, though.
No, man. I tell this about people about starting businesses or whatever. Oh, it's too late. I missed my. No, you never miss the window. There's never a window that's missed. There's always the future. What do you think is the biggest like encourage? What's the optimistic scenario? What gets you excited? I know it's easy because and we're being realistic, right? Neither of us like to think this way, and I know that. Right. But when we're talking about all this shit that might hit the fan with the economy and all these lockdown policies we've already seen, more stuff that would not be surprised if it's coming. What's the positive scenario though? What gets you excited? What makes you say, hey, here's where I see hope. Here's where I see optimism. Here's what makes me excited for the next 2, 5, 10 years, whatever that window is for you.
Well, do you want my positivity about humanity or about America in particular?
Let's do both.
Okay. I think for the globe, I think that the decentralization movement and the blockchain technology, all of these things are super hopeful. I think that it has the capacity to undermine and basically dismantle governments globally. And I think that that's amazingly hopeful. Now, I think that's part of the reason that we had such a bad past 12 months is because these governments are feeling it and they are pushing back. And it's natural that anybody who's holding on to power is going to hold it more tightly as they feel it slipping away. I think the fact that they've held it tightly, so tightly, unbelievably tightly, is evidence that it is slipping away, and that's hopeful. So I think that that's great. As for America, I think that our greatest reason for optimism is that you're getting these sanctuary kind of Bill of Rights movements. I think that Nevada, Montana has some crazy laws that they're passing where they're like, we won't acknowledge or enforce any new federal firearms laws, period. I mean, that's incredible. So I think that you are seeing the groundwork laid for a potential peaceful secession. And I think that that's the best outcome for America, personally, is that you have a handful of red states, maybe 10 or 12 of them, just break off. And you have, I mean, I'd be happy to see far more secessionary movements than that. I would like to see a dozen in America, but I'm just saying, realistically, it's probably going to be drawn on red and blue grounds. And I think that there's a chance that we go that direction. And if so, if we can have kind of a peaceful USSR style breakup, I think that would be, I know this sounds pessimistic, but I think it's probably as optimistic as I can be about the American governmental system.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that would be assuming it happens peacefully, I think it'd be a huge win, humongous win.
Too.
I mean, just
yeah,
the thing that slapped the shit out of me and completely shattered what I thought my Overton window of political possibility was in March of 2020 was the fact that everything happened instantaneously over the entire globe. It was like, it was like, oh shit, forget federalism. We don't even have like competition between international. I mean, it was just like blanket everywhere, instantly, exact same shit, like, holy
incredible.
cow. At least that's what it was. That's how it was presented to me and the information available to me. Maybe other countries were a lot different and that information wasn't coming through, but it was like, whoa. And that just made me radically rethink, and that's part of the reason why I think we did end up staying in the United States was like, how much better are you going to find it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like the U.S. is like the idea of what the U.S. was. The U.S. has never lived up to its own idea, but the idea of the U.S. died to me in 2020. And all final connections to that were severed in terms of the actual government and the idea of what it was. But then when I look at the beliefs of the populace here versus everywhere else in the world, like who's got a lower tolerance for tyranny? I don't know that I can find many places that have a lower tolerance than some parts of the US,
I think Poland is the only place, which is crazy. The Polish people are like hardcore, man. They are, they're having like,
that's good to hear. I didn't know that.
Yeah. What our Black Lives Matter movement was, that is their anti-lockdown movement. They have been burning and rioting and like going after central banks and shit. Like they are hardcore. So check them out. But yeah, I agree, man. It's that's what makes it so hard. But you know what's weird? And I was talking to my buddy Jose on No Way Jose's podcast, and we brought this up, is that basically because there's nowhere else to flee, that's almost a white pill. And I know that sounds counterintuitive at first, but because all of the people that value freedom are having the same conversation that you and I had today, and they're saying to themselves, where the fuck else am I going to go? That bodes well. That bodes well, because that means that they have to stay and fight, and they have to work, they have to get involved. They have to try and either the agorist route, or if you want to get into local politics, something to try and alleviate the tyranny locally so that you can weather whatever comes. I think that that's a reason to be hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. And I also want to make, sure that I'm not putting too much faith in the information I do have access to from around the world, because if I've learned anything,
right,
political events that I was at myself years and years ago when I worked in politics in the state of Michigan, I would be at an event, a protest or whatever, and then I would see it covered in the local news. And it was literally like they would use like fake pictures from other events, and they would just tell straight up lies about it. And this is something that's like super easy to access the information, right? And so when you've seen that yourself, you're like, oh, I can't trust any pictures that come out of anywhere. So like, I never know. And I've seen tweets. Now I don't know what these are from, but of like Italy, France, Germany, England, big protests. People are saying they're protests against the lockdown. Hopefully that's true. And they're not like
I don't
some
speak the language
from
but...
some rave in 2000 or something. You know what I mean? Like you just,
yeah,
I truly have
true.
never been more skeptical of all information, but I feel there's a part of me that knows, I know the remnant's bigger than people think. I know there's more resistance in these countries than people are willing to tell you. You think our government's going to report on all this? You know what I mean? We know that. We know enough to know that there's resistors all over the place.
For sure.
Just hard to, it's funny. It's hard for us to connect and find each other, not because we don't have access to information, but because the market for information is so flooded with bullshit that you can't tell what's what anymore, right? It's not like cut off the ability to communicate with each other. It's like, okay, that cat's out of the bag. So instead the market's just flooded with so much shit you can't know anymore, but it's there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the good thing about our worldview though, is that because we are discerning and because we have principles, you can just be flooded with all this information and then discern for yourself. Like I would rather that than having this, like when I was a kid, having, 5 news channels or something and just being like, well, this is all the truth, like that's a way worse existence.
I always love the, the old timers who are like, oh, all this fake news and all this whatever, like, we need to return journalism to do journalists. People need to do actual journalism. And I'm like what, you believe like during the Vietnam War or World War II, there were like 2 stations and they were totally controlled by government and they had to send their transcripts for approval. You think they were doing real journalism back then?
They have such a reverential tone when talking about like Walter Cronkite or any of these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just hilarious. I mean, of course you thought you were being told the truth. You had no other information to go off of. So like, I get it. But you probably weren't, so.
And now, thank God, you have Liberty Lockdown. So everybody go check out.
Thank God for Isaac Morehouse.
Check out Clint's podcast, man. It's absolutely awesome. Clint, this was a blast, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you again.